B.3, Client and Server Communication Model. In this video, we want to really understand the basic communication model between the client and the server. All right, so let's look at the overview. Web application architecture. How to run a web application on the client, server, internet, that environment. Here we have a special architecture. We call it three-tier architecture. From the diagram here, you can see there are three tiers. Tier number one, then the internet, we do not count it as a tier. Right? The internet, because it's the infrastructure there. Okay, we just use that internet infrastructure. Okay, yeah. So then, tier number two, server layer. Yeah. Tier number three, the last one, storage layer, data storage. So you can see the structure is pretty simple. So let us understand. So each tier, one by one. All right. First, the client tier. Tier number one, we call it client tier or client layer. Same meaning. People also call it presentation layer, tier or layer. The reason is simple. We do data presentation or business data presentation. Because a client requests some special business service from a particular server. Then the server returns the corresponding business service in a data form, right? Data form. Special data format. After the client side receives the return, the business data, then some good presentation way is needed at the client side to present the business data in a well-organized way. So that is the purpose for this client tier. All right. The second tier, middle tier. The server layer, server tier, middle, sit in the middle, or also business tier. So why people call it business tier? Because all the business rules are implemented in this layer. You need to implement business rules, right? A set of business rules. Okay? A set of business rules are implemented in this layer. Okay? Yeah. So people call it, business tier. Yeah. All right. Then the third tier, data access tier. So you put a database server here. Here you can see it's a database server. So the cylinder shape represents a database server. So storage, store data in this layer, For us, for this class, here we use we use MySQL here. We use MySQL as our third layer or tier. All right. So then, but there is another more advanced version, because in industry, especially for relatively big companies, they require more features. So they're not satisfied with the simple version, relatively simple version. So they take this more advanced version. You can see for this more advanced version, still 3-tier architecture, but the first tier, the last tier, the same as before, as the simple version above. But the middle tier, more complicated. So you can see there are two blocks. The first block, web servers. So in this part, you do relatively simple business. Then the second block, in this part, people do more advanced business features. So very complicated, very sophisticated in the second part. All right. So here we call it application server. So for the complex part, we use an application server there. I mentioned application server in the previous video. All right. So here you can see there are two types of web servers. Here, basic features, we just use web server. Application server, advanced features. In that way. All right. So next, now we are ready to understand the client-server communication model. All right. So look at this diagram. So this diagram gives us, direct, simple description of how communication occurs between client and server. Here, let me describe it. One step by step. The first step, when you need to start a communication cycle. It's a cycle by cycle. Many different cycles. So here we look at each cycle. So you need to start that one communication cycle from client. A client requests a connection to a server. A client sends a request to a server. How does it send a request? We will see in later diagram. We will see that. How does it send? Here, you just know a client sends a request to a server in some way, in some special way. All right. Then the server can either accept or reject the connection. Two options. The server side, the server side software can make this decision. Accept or reject. Here, why reject? Because for security reason. Sometimes your server may like to block some of the requests from certain locations with certain IP addresses. That's possible. So you have this option to block some of the requests. So that's why you have that reject possibility. All right. So here let's just consider the accept option. We assume server make that accept decision. So after that, a connection is established between client and server. Connection. Here, what do you mean connection established? We know connection. Actually, a connection between client and server is a data stream object. there is a data stream object to represent a connection. An object in computer main memory, the server side main memory, create this object. Object. Stream, sending data. So the data can be sent using the stream object. Send it to, the server. Not the server, the client machine. The client machine that initiates the communication cycle. Okay? Yeah. So that kind of detail. All right. The server establishes and maintains a connection with the client. Okay? Yeah. So, return data. Yeah. Then, next step, the server returns a response. Response, you can treat, so what do you mean response? Response object. So it's a data stream object returned as a response to the client. And after that object is returned, it disconnects the connection immediately. Disconnect. Cut off immediately. So that is important. Yeah. So why is that? So here, let me explain. Why disconnect immediately? The reason is, disconnect immediately. The reason is simple. To save resource. To save computer memory resource. Why? If you do not disconnect that data stream object, that object takes memory space, right? Memory resource. Okay, yeah. Think about, usually one server needs to provide services for large number of clients, right? Large number of clients, machines, okay? Yeah. If one server occupies the resource by a concrete connection, then if you maintain large number of connection objects with many clients, then sooner or later, the memory space in the server side will be used up quickly. Then the server running slower and slower. It runs out of memory resource. So the performance response time becomes slower and slower, So the users will get very poor experience. You click button, you need to wait long time to get a response. Nobody likes that experience, right? How to improve that? Release the resource immediately after one connection cycle. That's why we define a connection cycle. Okay? Yeah. After request response cutoff. If you want to do another communication, you can start another cycle. Right? Yeah. So in that situation, large number of client machines can connect to the same server, but each one just use very small slice of time slot. Very small, fraction of second. Small piece of time slot. So in that way, the communication can be very efficient. So that model could be very efficient. All right. All right. So next question. Here, this is another diagram just to give you a little more information. in this diagram, so you can see when a client sends a request to the server, actually, the request needs to go through multiple computers in the internet, as that relay style. Then the destination is the requested server. Okay, when the response is sent back, similar type, goes through several computers in the internet, in that way. All right. But next, I like to talk about the communication using the HTTP protocol. So later, when I try to find some time to talk about this important HTTP protocol. So here, the first question: how to start a request at a server client side? I left this question a few minutes ago, right? Now let me answer that question. How does a client send a request to a server? Very simple. From this diagram, you can see it. Right here, step number 1, you can see a user just types URL string, that URL that points one particular server in your URL bar in your web browser. Then you hit enter. The browser sends this URL to that server. Okay? Actually, that action, sending URL to one particular server, that action still needs to go through several steps. Now, here I do not talk about the details. Sometime later I may have a chance to talk about that. Here I just give you a little information. Because how to connect URL to a given server, right? So the first thing, this request needs to go to the DNS server, Domain Name Services. Special type of server called Domain Name Services, DNS servers, to get an IP address for your URL. Okay? IP address, we know on internet, each device is located by an IP address. Okay? But IP address, a sequence of numbers, a sequence of, many digits. So later we have time, we will talk about IP address a little bit. Because it is an important concept. We need to know a little bit about IP address. But the IP address, nobody can memorize the IP address. Okay? It is much harder to memorize than your telephone numbers. Telephone numbers, I feel people can only memorize small number of telephone numbers. For their immediate family members or some, very good friends, but not many usually, right? Because how to memorize? IP address even much harder to memorize than a typical telephone number. Okay? But then you need to use IP address to reach a remote server, but how to resolve it, right? So DNS server will do that job, resolving job. Okay? DNS will return the IP address of that remote server to the client machine. So then your client machine send, the second time, the client machine send the request, use the returned IP address, this time to the server. Then you can get to that server. with IP address, but it's hidden. You cannot see. It happens behind the scene. You may not realize it. Yeah, you may not realize it. Yeah, you cannot see it, but it occurs behind the scene. Yeah, so then you get return. The page, web page that return, so you see it. So you are very happy. Yeah, yeah. All right. So that's the basic information I like to give you for our part B, our lecture number 2 of this class. The topic is client and server communication. All right, so let me stop here.